Yeah, so actually wasn't able to book a theatre, so on with the review. Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju is undoubtedly my favourite series of 2016. An opening statement which is perhaps the best way to sell the uninitiated on a series which seems obstinately intent upon appearing niche and obscure. Regardless, over the next 20 minutes I shall endeavour to explain as to why this theatrical period piece is more than worth your time. Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju, a name both long enough to be of great annoyance when writing, but immensely fun to say, focuses around the Japanese theatrical tradition of Rakugo, a performance in which a solitary player acts out a short historical tale, during which the performer embodies all of the characters contained within, via the use of their voice, posture, and a smattering of minimalistic props. We are introduced to this art form by the recently released convict Kyoji, later Yotaro, who becomes infatuated with the discipline after a particularly evocative display during his incarceration by a master of the medium, Yakumo Yurakate, and pleased to become the storyteller's apprentice. However, this only comprises the setup for the melancholy meat of the story, with Yotaro's apprenticeship triggering a look back into his master's past, following Yakumo's rise through the bureaucratic world of Rakugo, as well as his friendship with fellow apprentice Tsukuroko, with Yakumo describing the events which led up to his dear companion's death. Which is not a spoiler, by the way, with this plotline being the jumping off point for the main narrative thrust, whilst lacing otherwise perfunctory scenes with a healthy dosage of tension. The story found within Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju is one woven with the utmost craftsmanship, deftly presenting numerous character arcs and relevant thematic musings, all whilst keeping a yarn about men sitting around talking for prolonged periods thoroughly gripping. A feat made all the more impressive by the fact that the series ending is dictated to us within the first episode. However, it would be impossible to discuss this narrative without first talking about its players, with Rakugo Shinju being a true character study, with its narrative largely revolving around three central figures: the stuffy present-day narrator Yakumo, then Kikihiko, the gifted but unruly Tsukuroko, and the slyly seductive geisha Miyokochi. Whilst this trio is certainly far from the most likeable set of leads one could find, sometimes even coming across as downright repellent, it was these imperfections which drew me in rather than distancing me from their plights. For their hypocrisy, stubbornness, and cowardice were all too endearingly human, making them the most compelling cast of last year. Which is handy when considering that their growth and development is the tentpole which holds up Rakugo Shinju. So it's lucky that the series exceeds in this area, with Rakugo Shinju brilliantly charting its characters' progression, whilst never being overbearingly blatant with their growth. Whilst changes such as Kikihiko's development of his own style of Rakugo are heavily discussed, more often than not the series draws the viewer's attention towards character growth through an ever-present feeling of cyclicality. Major events which rock the drama early on are often repeated in ways which appear warped and altered, highlighting the ever-changing nature of these individuals and the dynamics between one another. This can be anything, from a piece of music reprised in scenes in which the characters truly excel in their performance, the choice of a teacher to favour one student over another, or even something as monumental as characters mirroring those who have come before them in this series' many period settings. This brilliant use of repetition to further development is perhaps exemplified within episodes 2 and 5. In episode 2 we see Kikihiko at his lowest, gripped by anxiety as doubts over his capability as a performer begin to set in. He attempts to confide these fears with the benign housekeeper, Matsuda, only to hesitate at the final moment, before muttering to himself,
私にゃ落語なんて向いてないんじゃないか。
Here we see Kikihiko isolated and alone, with the shot composition beautifully illustrating this segregation, as Kikihiko is swaddled by mosquito nets, erecting a physical barrier between himself and those around him. Throughout much of this series, Kikihiko appears wary of growing close to others, seemingly in an attempt to shield himself from the pain of losing these companions. Kikihiko's lack of self-confidence is once again brought up in episode 5, only this time he's able to voice these concerns to the attentive Myokochi, who sits silently massaging his leg, removing the previously established barrier of separation. The direct comparison between these two scenes is invited through the use of repeated dialogue, illustrating Kikihiko's growth as an individual, aiding in Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju's portrayal of character growth throughout, as well as tying into larger ideas of fate and karma through this sense of cyclicality. This scene also draws attention to one of Rakugo Shinju's more significant motifs, that being the lead's fear of isolation and rejection. And it is at this point that I must draw attention to just how beautifully Rakugo is interwoven into the series' narrative. Artists, by the merit of their profession, require the appreciation of an audience in order to survive, making the fear of rejection all the more pressing, with Tsukuroko, an advocate for the community of Rakugo, reasoning that Rakugo can't be performed alone. However, this reliance upon others appears to contrast with the surface value of Rakugo. Rakugo is a seemingly isolated form of theatre, a one-man play in which the performer fulfills all the essential roles solo. How appropriate then that Kikihiko should profess to desire solitude above all else for much of the series, embodying his art form. A one-man life in a sense, if all the world's a stage, with Kikihiko's many relationships conflicting with his self-sustaining interpretation of Rakugo. This ideological disconnect between the two leads and how it alters the way in which they live their lives demonstrates how the character's art is shown to be their lifeblood, extending into every aspect of their lives, no matter how private, defining their friendships, passions and romances, creating a wholly immersive and concentrated experience, with seemingly every element of Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju being homed around its themes and messages. This conflict of ideals over whether or not Rakugo is the effort of the individual or the many is central to Rakugo Shinju. For whilst Rakugo is a theatre performed alone, it is, at its heart, one built around a love for conversations. In fact, this is another way in which Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju can be seen to be inextricably linked with the conventions of Rakugo. This series is largely comprised of rapidly paced conversations between two individuals, with the quick-witted banter and good-humoured rapport doing much to conjure up the tightly scripted place around which so much of this story focuses. In fact, these leads are at their most enjoyable when conversing with one another, with the stiff-natured Kikihiko working wonders with Tsukuroko's carefree persona. Yes, this is a character dynamic seen numerous times throughout anime and beyond, but that's largely because it can lead to some delightfully balanced interactions, with much being made of how the two friends complete one another throughout the series, even if this does mean that the two can be somewhat exasperating when not in the other's presence. But unfortunately, not all of Rakugo can be so good-natured, with much of the series drama being based around misunderstandings, or characters being unable to open up and be honest with one another, as is so often the way with anime. But it is a somewhat apt predicament for those who earn their keep within the industry of performance, with these characters often insisting upon maintaining their act even to their own detriment. The extent to which these performances are ingrained within the principal cast is even expressed visually, with the slight, beguilingly attractive features of Kikihiko and the rounder, more rugged look of Tsukuroko, conjuring up the appearance commonly attributed to that of a fox or tanuki in human form, animals known within Japanese folklore for their transformative powers, illustrating their capacity to hide the truth, in addition to the unity of ideas running through Rakugo Shinju, presenting these men as the embodiment of their trade within this series' refreshingly ambivalent approach to art, presenting their gifts as both a talent as well as a curse. For these deceptions can result in some of the series' more exasperatingly frustrating moments, with this too being a fairly common convention within Rakugo tragically contorted, with Jessica Milner Davis describing in her novel Understanding Humor in Japan how the indirectness is used in Rakugo to render the conversations, or sometimes even the whole story, humorous, in regards to the indirect nature of conversation in Japan. In Rakugo Shinju we see this notion played out to its logical extreme, with fairly tragic consequences.
ちょうどいいじゃないのさ。遅いな。金蔵を叩き起こすと。
This, to me, characterizes what is so masterful about the characters and narrative found within Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju. All too often, a series content to grapple with their subject matter in as broad a sense as possible, but not here. With Rakugo's plotting and characterization being both precise and taut in its execution, with the trials and tribulations faced by all those contained within this narrative being both honed around and reflections of their theatrical occupation. This results in one of the most richly satisfying and layered watches that I've ever had the pleasure of consuming. Of course, one of the most impressive factors of Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju is its use of every tool at its disposal, with the series' excellent direction and visuals being yet another standout feature. Shinichi Omata helmed this series, with his handling of the Rakugo sequences being the series' uncontested peak in terms of direction. For much of the first episode, Rakugo is shrouded in mystery, as we only see glimpses of the art form, whilst gaining a sense of the artistry that goes into any given performance, with the camera often utilising shots concealed by shadows, in combination with particularly evocative imagery relevant to the tale at hand. Much like the new apprentice Yotaro, we only have an idea of the feeling of Rakugo, rather than a grasp of its fundamental skills. We too are learning. It's not until we see Yotaro's first successful performance that we finally grasp what makes brilliant Rakugo, as well as being let in on one of Rakugo Shinju's riskier directional choices. The Rakugo performances are often delivered in their entirety. Whilst this may seem like a recipe fraught with risking the audience's attention or sacrificing valuable screen time, Rakugo Shinju skillfully sidesteps these concerns by directing these sequences with an unbridled sense of bravado and precision, in addition to making each performance essential to the character's development as both a performer and an individual. This largely comes about in the authenticity of feeling conjured up by the series' shot composition and editing, creating an easily identifiable distinction between a successful performance or a failure. This is achieved through brilliant editing and cinematography, with the camera often cutting on character changes, adding a satisfying pace to the proceedings, whilst the breaking of the 180 rule within the series' shot composition makes the performances feel like a genuine conversation, effectively visualizing the storyteller's skill at creating characters. This is further aided with up-tempo jazz pieces often accompanying these performances, adding an exhilarating momentum to the tales. Throughout all of this, Omata is careful to remember the audience, always taking time to register their reactions in an aside, feeding into one of Rakugo Shinju's central conceits: you can't do Rakugo alone. Of course, the opposite is also true, with an unsuccessful performance often being hallmarked by some sign of disconnect between performer and audience, whether that may be said actor appearing through a screen, or by having them languish within a single, uninterrupted take, stubbornly refusing to cut away, making each transition appear laboured and awkward. This exquisite manipulation of visuals in order to recreate the atmosphere of a performance speaks volumes for a character's development in ways which a simple line of expositional dialogue cannot, in addition to making these sequences some of the most captivating within anime. However, while Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju has a healthy admiration for the storytellers at the heart of the performance, it's also keen to remind us that they are just that, performers. For whilst we certainly share the audience's perspective for much of these shows, we're also allowed to catch a glimpse behind the curtain, with Omata paying close attention to smaller details throughout, such as the repositioning of feet or a bead of sweat upon an exerted actor. These are private details displaying the individual behind the art, tying in visually with the piece's musings upon the nature of performance. Though of course, Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju will be a series of two halves should this level of care and attention fail to leave the theatres. And thankfully, no such division occurred, with much of the show's external scenes being as precisely beautiful as their theatrical counterparts. The focus upon small, private actions remains, emphasising how even off the stage the performance doesn't end. And it's with beautifully subtle directions such as this that Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju is able to tell its story visually, weaving arcs of small gestures within its already dense narrative. Though of course there's more to Rakugo Shinju's visuals than a mere assortment of minute details, with the series' larger picture displaying an absorbingly refined portrayal of reality. This is not a series that's particularly flashy with its design elements and animation, but is nonetheless superb for what it aims to achieve, with the dull, muted colour palette conveying a genuine sense of place. There is something almost oppressive about the texture of the series' aesthetic, from its diluted lighting and harsh environments to the distinctly mature character designs, creating an air of tangibility to the visuals which almost feels as if it could be breathed in, wonderfully evoking the Japan of the early to mid 20th century, with its largely drab exteriors contrasting with the ethereal bright world of the theatre. That does not mean to say that portions of Rakugo Shinju are mundane to look at, with the shot composition always keeping things fresh, while certain visuals are particularly arresting, with a number of scenes towards the series' conclusion leaving me utterly breathless. Though many of these images would have lost their beauty had they not been set in motion. Rakugo Shinju's animation is perfectly serviceable for the most part, but on the odd occasion achieves a rare kind of understated beauty. This is likely because the opportunities for animation set pieces are rather limited given the series' premise, unless of course they were to go completely over the top with characters' hand gestures and the like. The staff at Studio Dean instead trained their eye on capturing the particular quirks of gestures and facial expressions that truly brought many of these characters and their performances to life, adding the final layer to Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju's exquisite visuals. Whilst the visuals certainly placed the viewer within the world of Rakugo, it was the sound design and music which made this truly immersive. The series' audio is delicious, detailed, effectively recreating the atmosphere and acoustics of locations, whilst the performances of the series seiyus are worthy of note, particularly in regard to the storytellers, with each delivering a performance worthy of their character's status as masters of their medium, in addition to managing to convincingly play their roles through several different time periods. However, it is the finger-clicking good soundtrack which absolutely steals the show in the auditory department, with its combination of up-tempo jazz tracks, traditional orchestral pieces, and the music native to the Rakugo theatres, making for one of 2016's finest soundtracks. Kanishibue's compositions were capable of mustering feelings of delight, despair, and dread, all whilst perfectly scoring this series' narrative, with motifs such as the melody of Degi Kokoro signalling a performer's development throughout its many iterations, whilst the familiar sounds of taiko drums and shamisen can be found within the first episode's climax, the sound traditionally found at the opening of a Rakugo story. These pieces were simply the perfect accompaniment for the series, with the audio of Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju being yet another example of the absolute tour de force of talent which brought this series together. As someone who's heavily invested in the creation of visual media, I often dissect and analyse products from a technical standpoint, appraising their use of certain techniques and creative decisions. However, in the case of Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju, so strong was my immersion that I simply wished to peel back the screen and be enveloped by it. This series felt to me to be one of the most complete and cohesive works I've ever witnessed from anime, with its storytelling, characters, visuals and sound, all working together to create an utterly incredible experience. Though, I must admit I may have been somewhat predisposed to love this series, having a preference towards period settings in addition to a great interest in the subject matter at Rakugo Shinju's center. But so layered is the construction of this tragically twisted and blisteringly beautiful series that I believe almost anyone can find something to love or admire in Rakugo Shinju's 13 episodes. It's perhaps fitting that this series faces the same plight as the art form it depicts, as it struggles to find an audience in a world of easy entertainment and more universal fantasy fare. And so after 18 minutes of rambling, I would encourage you to take a detour, venture down some back alley of anime, and take a chance on a strange little show about an archaic art form preserved in dusty, derelict halls by its foolhardy, stubborn guardians. And I think you might just find a series worthy of a standing ovation. And there we go, it is finally done and finished. Yes, I'm not entirely sure as to how that dragged on quite as long as it did, but I am very glad to have it over. So just a couple of thank yous to round the video off, with first and foremost being Ben, who helped me film that introductory sequence, and you can see more of his stuff over at his channel. And I'd also like to thank my family who helped me film a number of sequences, in addition to allowing me to transform the living room into a Rakugo theatre, or at least as close as I could get to one. But yes, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully the next video won't take 6 months to get out. Oh, I've just jinxed it, haven't I?